The first clue didn't come from my house. It came through my radio. I was sitting alone in my patrol car just after clearing a domestic, engine still running, window cracked, half-finished report glowing on the laptop. Dispatch was joking around with my sergeant in that loose, half-dead way cops do when the night gets quiet for 30 seconds and nobody wants to admit they're already exhausted. Then Mercer said something. Just a stupid little line. A throwaway joke. Nothing I should have remembered 10 minutes later. But I remembered it because I'd already heard it. At home. From my wife. Same words. Same dry pause before the last part. Same little beat in the middle. Like she knew exactly where the laugh was supposed to land. I sat there staring through the windshield and didn't move. My first thought wasn't that she was cheating. It was worse than that. How would she even know that? That was the first time something in me shifted. Not enough to make me honest. Not enough to make me say the words, wife, boss, affair. Just enough to make the rest of that year start sounding different. And once that happened, all the things I had been explaining away stopped feeling separate. That's the part people don't really understand when they hear a story like this. They think betrayal starts with one big moment. A text message, a lipstick mark, a neighbor saying the wrong thing, a husband walking into his own house and seeing something he can never unsee. What happened to me was slower than that. By the time I finally admitted what was going on between my wife and my boss, I was the last man in my own precinct to understand it. I worked patrol, mid-sized department. Not a giant city machine where nobody knows anybody, and not a tiny town either. Just big enough to have politics and small enough that patterns mattered. Long nights, crashes on wet roads, drunks who cried in the back seat and denied everything by noon. Domestic calls that started stupid and ended mean. The kind of job that makes coffee taste like medicine and turns tired into a permanent layer of your personality. My wife Erin wore a badge too. People hear that and think it must have made things easier. Same job, same humor, same understanding. And some of that was true. I never had to explain why I needed 10 quiet minutes after a rough shift. She never had to explain why some nights she came home looking normal but feeling miles away. We both knew what the job could do to a person. What we didn't do was talk about what it had already done to us. That was the trap. Our marriage didn't look broken from the outside. It looked efficient. We talked all the time, but most of it was logistics. Shift times, groceries, coffee, laundry, court dates, which one of us was nights, which one of us needed sleep, whose turn it was to take the car in. We still functioned like a team, and that let me lie to myself about the rest. If your marriage gets bad slowly enough, you can mistake routine for stability. That was us by then. Not miserable, not openly cold, just worn down in a way that felt respectable because of the job. The first signs weren't dramatic. Erin stopped getting upset when my schedule got worse. That probably sounds small, but married people know the shape of disappointment. Mine used to look like a sigh, or a sharp little, again? Or her standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed while I told her Mercer had me buried on another run of nights. She didn't love it before, but she reacted to it. Then one day she stopped. Mercer would hit me with another ugly stretch of night shifts, or tack on a detail that guaranteed I wouldn't get home until sunrise, and Erin would just nod and say, "Okay." No complaint, no frustration, no fake support either. Just calm. At the time, I told myself maybe that meant we'd matured. Maybe she was handling the job better than before. Maybe we were both just too tired to keep fighting about schedules neither of us controlled anyway. That's what denial sounds like in a grown man's head. Not dramatic, reasonable. Then she started asking about my schedule in a way that felt too precise. Not, "You working tomorrow?" More like, "What time are you really done? Mercer still running nights this week? You staying through the full shift? You on West Side again or just North Sector?" Specific questions. Too specific. Every time I noticed it, I had a clean answer ready. She's trying to plan dinner. She wants to know when I'll be home. She's organizing her own week. You can keep a lie alive a long time if the lie is one you tell yourself. Things in the house change too. Nothing big enough to fight over. That was part of what made it dangerous. My keys stopped going missing. That sounds stupid, I know. But little domestic patterns tell on people. For years, I'd come home after shift half dead, drop my keys and wallet wherever I stopped moving, then waste 2 minutes cursing at myself the next morning. Suddenly, they were always on the narrow table by the door. Same place. Lined up beside my wallet. My patrol bag where it belonged. My boots turned outward on the mat. Erin was tidy. She was not that tidy with my things. I noticed it. Then I told myself the same thing I told myself about everything else. That's new. And I left it there. One morning after shift, I got home a little after 6. The house wasn't dirty. It wasn't messy. It just felt used. Like life had already happened in it before I walked through the door and then been cleaned back into place. The sink was empty. A coffee cup had already been washed and turned upside down in the rack. Erin was awake, dressed, makeup done, not like she was headed somewhere important, just composed. "Ready?" She looked up and said, "You're back out tonight, right?" That was the first thing she said. Not, "How was your shift?" Not, "You look exhausted." Just that. I remember feeling the question land wrong before I understood why. It sounded logistical. Not caring, not irritated, not even cold. Scheduled. I said, "Yeah. Why?" She shrugged. "Just asking." I let that go too. At work, the air around me started changing before I admitted any of it to myself. Conversation softened when I walked up. That's the only way I know how to say it. Not stopped. Softened. A joke would trail off. Somebody suddenly cared too much about paperwork. Two guys standing close together would move apart just enough to make the whole thing feel accidental. Once, before briefing, Daniels pulled a chair out for me and said, "Sit down, man." He meant well. That was the problem. There's a kind of kindness men use when they know something about your life and wish they didn't. I felt that from him and pretended I didn't. Because every department has one guy who thinks every whisper is about him. Every glance means something. Every schedule shift is personal. I was not going to become that guy. So I stayed normal. That became my whole strategy. Stay normal. Don't ask ugly questions unless you're prepared to live with ugly answers. The first time I saw Erin and Mercer together in a way that made my stomach shift was at a department barbecue behind training. Families, paper plates, warm beer, kids running around in tiny shirts with badge logos on them. One of those events departments put on to prove everybody still has a human side. Mercer walked up to the cooler, and before he even bent down, Erin reached in, moved 2 cans aside, and handed him the exact beer he always drank. "Yours is in the bottom," she said, like always. He took it without even checking. "You know me too well." That was all. No flirting. No touching. No look across the yard that only I could understand. That wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me was how easy it was. How practiced. Like two people who had already built small routines together and forgotten they were visible. I noticed that too, and I buried it right next to everything else. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe everybody in the department had routines with everybody else. Maybe I was tired and weird and making connections where there weren't any. That's the thing about denial. It doesn't have to beat reality. It just has to keep a softer version of reality alive long enough to get you through one more day. The middle of that year was all repetition. Mercer had more control over schedules than he should have if a man was trying to stay clean. Not absolute control. Enough. Enough to move bodies around, assign details, stick one guy on a stretch of nights and let another guy float. Enough to decide whose absence became predictable. Mine did. For a while I blamed department politics. Every patrol cop thinks somebody else is getting a better deal. That's just the job. But my nights weren't random bad luck. They were useful bad luck. Long runs, late extensions, details that kept me out until sunrise. The exact kind of schedule that left a clean window where I'd be gone and Erin would know I was gone. And the stranger part was how smoothly she adapted to all of it. She wasn't fighting my absence. She was building around it. That should have woken me up. Instead, I kept translating it into something smaller. She's coping better. We're older now. We don't need drama over every shift. That sentence right there could have saved me months if I'd listened to the part of it that felt wrong. No drama because the conflict had already moved somewhere else. One night, another officer, a younger guy named Flores, asked me while we were finishing paperwork, "Everything good at home?" No smile, no joke. Just that. I looked at him and said, "Why wouldn't it be?" He shrugged too fast. "Just asking." That stayed with me all night. Because men at work don't usually ask another man that unless something in his face or his life has already become visible. By then, I had two voices in my head. One said, "This is nothing. Don't wreck your own life over fragments." The other said, "Nothing repeats this cleanly by accident." I chose the first voice every time. That's the part I own. Nobody tricked me into that. Nobody hypnotized me. I had enough pieces to start asking harder questions, and every time I got close, I picked relief instead. The click didn't come from a phone. It didn't come from a witness. It came from a schedule board. I had to come in on an off morning because admin needed a signature on some overtime correction, and the printed patrol schedules for the previous 2 months were still clipped outside Mercer's office. Shift changes, reassignments, detail coverage. Dead department paper nobody looks at unless they have to. I don't know why I kept reading that far back. Maybe because some part of me was finally done protecting me. I stood there with those pages in my hand and saw the pattern. Not every time. That would have made it too neat. Enough times. Enough that once I saw it, I couldn't make it random again. Whenever I got the long night stretches that kept me gone until sunrise, Mercer was off early, reassigned, or somehow no longer tied to the back half of the same shift. Not once. Not twice. A pattern. And once my brain finally stopped helping me, it started handing me back all the little things I'd buried. The washed coffee cup before dawn. The exact questions. The calm. The beer at the barbecue. The chair pulled out in briefing. The way my keys were always set neatly by the door. And one afternoon from weeks earlier when I came out of the shower getting ready for work and Erin was changing the sheets. I remember saying, "Why now?" And she said, "I'm trying to stay ahead of the week." At the time, that sounded normal. Standing outside Mercer's office with those schedules in my hands, it changed shape. Not poetry. Not some dramatic symbol. Just one more small domestic thing that made a different kind of sense now. She wasn't just living around my job. She was preparing for my absence. That was it. Not some giant detective moment. Just the point where I finally ran out of innocent explanations. I didn't investigate after that. I didn't go through her phone. I didn't dig for dates, rooms, or messages. There is a point where proof stops giving you power and starts becoming self-harm. I didn't need to know everything. I knew enough. I went home that afternoon and sat at the kitchen table until Aaron got back. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't planning speeches. I just felt emptied out in that cold way that comes after you've spent too long holding a lie upright and your arms finally give out. She walked in, saw me there in plain clothes in the middle of the day, and paused. "What are you doing home?" That was the first thing she said. Still logistics, still timing. I looked at her and said, "I'm filing for divorce." There was no explosion. Aaron was never an explosive person. That was part of why this took so long. Quiet people can do a lot of damage before anyone around them understands what shape it's taking. She set her keys down and said, "Who told you something?" Even then, she didn't deny it. That hurt in a very clean way. I said, "Nobody had to." She looked at me for a second, then toward the sink, then back again. I watched the moment she realized I wasn't there for a partial truth. Not an argument. Not a softer version. Just the end. "I didn't plan this," she said. That was the one line that almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because by then I understood how much of it had been planning. Not romantic planning, not fantasy. Practical planning. Schedules. Windows. Knowing when I'd be gone. Knowing when I would not. I asked her one question. "How long?" She told me. The number made sense the second I heard it. Long enough to fit the pattern. Short enough to sound survivable if she needed it to. I didn't ask for dates. I didn't ask where. I didn't ask whether it started before or after some memory I still wanted to keep. Men ask for those details when they still think knowledge is going to buy back dignity. It won't. So I asked the only thing that actually mattered to me. Did people know? That changed her face. Not because she suddenly understood my pain, because she understood the question was worse than the affair. She said, "I don't know." That was a lie. Maybe protective, maybe cowardly. Still a lie. I nodded and said, "That's enough." There was no screaming after that. No thrown glass. No march back to the precinct to make a public scene out of private humiliation. I called a lawyer the next morning. Aaron moved into the guest room, then into an apartment. We divided the house the way adults divide things when the real damage can't be measured in dollars or furniture. I never confronted Mercer. People hate that part. They want me to have blown up his office, slammed him into a wall, forced the whole thing into daylight. That wasn't going to help me. You don't get dignity back from an audience that already watched you lose it. Mercer did call me into his office once after the papers started moving. Shut the door. Gave me that careful, practiced concern men like him know how to wear when they need to look decent. "You doing all right?" I looked at him and understood something useful in that moment. Men like that survive inside other people's shame because they know how to stay calm in it. I said, "You don't get to ask me that." Then I walked out before he could build himself a cleaner sentence. The department never said any of it out loud. Not to me. That would have required a kind of courage most people don't have, when the thing in front of them is another man's humiliation instead of a dangerous call. But the looks were enough. The softness. The caution. The way people spoke around me like I had been injured somewhere nobody could legally acknowledge. That's why I resigned. Not because my wife cheated. Departments are full of ruined marriages. Men still make roll call. Not because Mercer was my superior. Departments survive worse men than him all the time. I resigned because I could not keep walking into a building where my own shift schedule had been part of my replacement. I could not wear the same uniform in the same rooms where other men had watched it forming, while I kept protecting myself from the obvious. I couldn't do the job from inside that kind of shame. On my last day, I turned in my gear, signed the forms, emptied my locker, and carried one box down the hall. Daniels shook my hand. The desk sergeant gave me a nod that said more than words would have. The woman in records asked if I needed copies of anything and wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Then I walked out to the lot. That was the part that hit. Not the divorce papers, not the empty side of the bed, not the silence in the house after Aaron was gone. The lot. Because I stood there looking at the row of patrol units and thought about how many nights I had driven out believing the dangerous part of my life was happening on calls, in traffic stops, in other people's houses, and the real damage had been somewhere else the whole time. Orderly, patient, built around my schedule. People ask whether Aaron loved him. I don't know. I never cared enough to ask. Love would almost make it easier in a twisted way. Love sounds messy, human, uncontrolled. What happened to me felt cleaner than that. He created space. She stepped into it, and I kept explaining the pattern until there was almost nothing left of my place in it. That's the part that still bothers me. Not that she betrayed me, not even that he outranked me. It's that they didn't have to be smarter than me. They just needed access, timing, and a man willing to call his own instincts paranoia because the truth would have cost more. That's the confession part of this. Not that my wife cheated. Not that my boss used my schedule against me. Those things are ugly, but they're simple. The ugly part is what I did for them. I saw enough to stop lying to myself long before I actually did. I just kept choosing the version that let me get through one more shift. These days I don't wear the uniform. I took a civilian job. Less money, less adrenaline, better sleep. I still wake up some mornings before dawn with that old patrol feeling in my body, like I forgot something in the trunk or missed a call I was supposed to clear. Then I remember I'm not going back. I'm not married anymore either. That ended quietly, which was probably the only clean thing about it. Loud endings are for people still trying to win something from each other. We were past that by the time I let the truth in, but every once in a while I still hear that joke in my head. Mercer on the radio, Aaron in my kitchen. Same line, same timing. Same little overlap between work and home that should have woken me up months earlier than it did. That was my real reveal, not the affair. The moment my shift and my marriage touched the same sentence, and some part of me knew there was no innocent explanation left. I just kept living like there was. That's what still gets me. Not that they hid it well, that they didn't have to.